never imagined I'd find myself in the realm of wealth. My life was simple. An unremarkable apartment, a reliable but unflashy car, and a bank account that reflected my modest career as a 34-year-old high school English teacher in a small New England town. So when the letter arrived from Blackwood & Sons law firm, I assumed it was a mistake. The heavy cream envelope with its embossed logo stood out among my usual bills. Inside was a summons to attend the reading of Harold Thorne's will. Harold Thorne, a distant relative, my mother's second cousin. We had only met twice, once at a family reunion when I was 7, and again at my mother's funeral 12 years ago. He had seemed ancient then, towering in an impeccable suit with piercing blue eyes that didn't just look at you, but through you. He had offered his condolences with a firm handshake and handed me his business card, saying, "If you ever need anything, Matthew." I never called, and now he was gone, and I was being summoned for the reading of his will. The next day, I dialed the number on the letter. "Blackwood & Sons, how may I direct your call?" The receptionist's voice was crisp. "My name's Matthew Collins. I received a letter about Harold Thorne's will reading." "Ah, Mr. Collins?" "Yes, we've been expecting your call. Mr. Blackwood would like to speak with you personally." The line clicked, and a deep voice filled my ear. "Mr. Collins, Malcolm Blackwood here. Thank you for calling." "Mr. Blackwood, I think there's been some mistake." Harold Thorne was barely an acquaintance. "No mistake, Mr. Collins. Mr. Thorne was very specific about who should be present. The car service will collect you Thursday at 9 a.m. The reading will take place at Thornwood Manor, Mr. Thorne's estate about 2 hours north of Millfield." "All right. It's just unexpected." Many things about Harold Thorne were unexpected, Mr. Collins. That's what made him such an interesting client. There was something in Blackwood's voice I couldn't quite place. "The driver will have further details." "Good day." The line went dead before I could ask anything more. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter. Thornwood Manor. The name conjured images of Gothic mansions and family secrets, a place more suited for novels than modern Massachusetts. Thursday arrived in a flash. I had taken a personal day from school telling the principal it was for a family matter, a technically true statement, I suppose. The car that arrived was a sleek black Lincoln, the driver, a taciturn man who introduced himself only as Porter. He held the door open with a slight bow. "Mr. Collins," he said, his accent faintly British. "It's a pleasure." "You knew Harold Thorne?" I asked as we began driving. Porter's eyes met mine through the rearview mirror. "I worked for Mr. Thorne for 27 years, sir. I knew him as well as anyone could." "What was he like?" I pressed. A pause. "Complicated. Please give me a like and subscribe so I can be motivated to create more great videos." The conversation fell into silence, and I could tell Porter wasn't inclined to elaborate. As we drove north, the landscape shifted. Urban sprawl slowly gave way to countryside dotted with small towns. Finally, we turned onto a narrow road that twisted through dense forest. The trees formed a canopy overhead, dimming the morning light. After several miles, the forest opened up, revealing a sprawling estate. Thornwood Manor. The mansion was massive, built from dark stone with turrets and gables, towering windows, and a slate roof. It looked like it had been transplanted from the English countryside. Porter drove through wrought iron gates and up a curved driveway, stopping in front of a grand staircase that led to double doors of dark wood. "We've arrived, Mr. Collins." Porter opened the door for me. "Mr. Blackwood is already inside with the other guests." Other guests. Of course, I wasn't the only one named in Harold Thorne's will. That made more sense. The interior was just as imposing as the exterior: high ceilings, dark wood paneling, oil paintings in ornate frames, and antique furniture that looked both valuable and uncomfortable. A crystal chandelier cast prismatic light across a marble floor in the entrance hall. porter led me down a corridor and through a set of doors. "The library, sir. They're waiting for you." The library was cavernous 2 stories high, with bookshelves that reached to the ceiling accessible by a spiral staircase. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, with a portrait of a stern-faced man with piercing blue eyes hanging above it. Harold Thorne, looking younger. 5 people turned to face me as I entered. Malcolm Blackwood, I recognized immediately, tall with silver hair and a well-trimmed beard, dressed in a sharp suit. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Mr. Collins, thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." The others were strangers. A woman in her early 50s with sharp blonde hair wearing a tailored black dress. Beside her, a man of similar age with a receding hairline and wire-rimmed glasses. On the opposite side of the room, a younger woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair and striking green eyes. And finally, an elderly man, frail and thin, sitting in a wheelchair. "Allow me to make introductions," Blackwood said. "This is Margaret Thorne, Harold's sister-in-law, and her husband, Dr. Richard Evans." The blonde woman and the man with glasses nodded coolly. "Miss Eliza Ward, Harold's goddaughter." The dark-haired woman gave a faint smile. "Mr. Edwin Thorne, Harold's cousin, and until recently, his closest living relative." The elderly man peered at me with weary eyes. "And this," Blackwood continued, "is Matthew Collins, son of the late Elizabeth Collins, née Marshall." Marshall, Edwin Thorne's voice was surprisingly strong. "Catherine's girl." "Yes," I replied. "Catherine Marshall was my grandmother." Edwin studied me intently. "You have her eyes." "Now that we're all acquainted," Blackwood said, "shall we proceed?" We arranged ourselves in leather armchairs around the fireplace. Blackwood remained standing, holding a portfolio. "As the executor of Harold Thorne's estate, it is my duty to read his last will and testament and to explain certain unusual provisions within it." He scanned the room. "Before I begin, I should note that Harold was of sound mind when this document was prepared and signed. The end came rather suddenly," Margaret said, her voice brittle. "A healthy man of 73 doesn't simply drop dead from heart failure." Margaret, her husband, murmured, placing a hand on her arm. "The medical examiner found nothing suspicious," Blackwood replied. "But we're not here to discuss the circumstances of Harold's passing. We're here to address his wishes." He opened the portfolio and extracted several sheets of paper. "I, Harold Edward Thorne, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament, hereby revoking all previous wills." Blackwood's voice adopted a formal tone. "First, to my sister-in-law, Margaret Thorne. I leave the sum of $1 million with the hope that it will provide her with the security she has always sought." Margaret's face remained impassive, but her fingers tightened around her handbag. "To my dear friend and physician, Dr. Richard Evans. I leave my collection of rare medical texts and antiquities, along with the sum of $500,000 in gratitude for his years of care and friendship." Dr. Evans nodded, his expression unreadable. "To my goddaughter, Eliza Ward, I leave my collection of art and the sum of $2 million to be held in trust until her 35th birthday, or until she has completed her doctoral studies, whichever comes first." Eliza's green eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent. "To my cousin Edwin Thorne, I leave my personal effects, my library of occult and esoteric literature, and the sum of $3 million. Edwin leaned forward in his wheelchair. "The library, not the house." Blackwood's expression remained neutral. "The will addresses the disposition of Thornwood Manor separately." He continued reading. "As to the matter of Thornwood Manor itself, along with all its grounds, outbuildings, and the remainder of my estate, including all investments, business interests, and liquid assets, approximately $70 million at the time of this writing, I hereby bequeath it all to Matthew Collins, son of Elizabeth Collins, née Marshall, contingent upon his acceptance of certain conditions." The room went silent. 5 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. I felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. "There must be some mistake," I managed to say. "There is no mistake," Mr. Collins Blackwood replied. Harold was very specific. "This is absurd," Margaret said sharply. Harold barely knew the man. Why would he leave everything to a virtual stranger? "The will explains his reasoning," Blackwood said, returning to the document. "My decision may seem unusual to those who believe themselves closer to me, but it is made with full awareness. The Thorn legacy requires a specific custodian, one who carries the bloodline, but has remained untouched by its complexities." "Complexities?" Edwin scoffed. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Blackwood ignored the interruption. "Matthew Collins represents the last branch of the family tree that has not been compromised. He is the final heir." "Final heir to what exactly?" I asked. "That brings us to the conditions of the inheritance," Blackwood said. "According to the will, you must reside at Thornwood Manor for a minimum of 1 year before taking full possession. During that time, you will be required to study the history of the Thorn family and certain artifacts in Harold's collection. If you choose to decline or fail to complete the year in residence, the entire estate will be liquidated and the proceeds donated to various charitable organizations. Nothing further will go to anyone present." "This is outrageous," Margaret snapped, standing up, her face flushed with anger. "Richard and I cared for Harold for years. We were family, not some distant relation who showed up twice in 30 years. "The terms are quite clear," Mrs. Thorne Blackwood said, calmly, his voice unwavering. "And legally binding. We'll contest it, won't we, Edwin?" Margaret turned to her husband, her voice tinged with frustration. "Edwin Thorne." The elderly man stared into the fire, lost in thought. "The bloodline," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Always the bloodline." "Edwin," Margaret said, her voice softening. Edwin looked up, his gaze distant. "Contest if you wish, Margaret. It won't matter." Harold knew what he was doing. He always did. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "The question is whether young Mr. Collins here understands what he's being offered. 70 million in a mansion," I said, trying to make sense of it all. "Seems pretty straightforward." Edwin Thorne let out a dry laugh, the sound like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "Oh my boy, there's nothing straightforward about the Thorne inheritance. Nothing at all." Mr. Collins Blackwood interjected, his voice smooth and authoritative. "You don't need to make a decision immediately. The will allows you 30 days to consider. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay at Thornwood to get a feel for the place." "I have a job," I said, still feeling overwhelmed. "Students' responsibilities, all of which can be addressed if you choose to accept," Blackwood replied. Harold made provisions. A substantial stipend is available immediately to cover any transition costs, and Thornwood has a full staff who will continue to be employed regardless of your decision. My head was spinning. Just yesterday, I had been worrying about my car payment. Today I was being offered more money than I could spend in a lifetime. It didn't seem real. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion tomorrow," Blackwood suggested. "It's a lot to take in, and I'm sure Mr. Collins would like some time to process. Porter will show each of you to your rooms. Dinner will be served at 7. As the others filed out, Blackwood gestured for me to remain behind. When we were alone, he closed the library doors and turned to me with a serious expression. "There are aspects of the will that I did not read aloud," he said, his tone low and measured. "Private instructions from Harold that concern only you." "What kind of instructions?" I asked, intrigued but wary. Blackwood walked to a desk in the corner and unlocked a drawer with a key from his pocket. He withdrew a sealed envelope and handed it to me. "Harold left this for you," he said. "He instructed me to give it to you privately after the formal reading of the will." The envelope was heavy, made of the same cream-colored paper as the letter I had received, with my name written on it in elegant flowing script. "What's in it?" I asked. "I don't know," Blackwood said. "It was sealed when Harold gave it to me." He hesitated. "But I should warn you, Mr. Collins. Harold Thorne was a complicated man, as Porter said. Brilliant, certainly. Wealthy, obviously. But there were aspects of his life and interests that were unusual. Unusual how I asked my curiosity growing. Harold was fascinated by the esoteric, the occult. Not in a frivolous way. He was a serious scholar, but his studies took him down some dark paths. Blackwood glanced at the portrait above the fireplace. The Thorne family has a long and not entirely savory history. Wealth accumulated through questionable means. Rumors of dealings with forces best left undisturbed. You're talking about what exactly? Magic witchcraft, I asked, my skepticism evident. Blackwood's expression remained serious. I'm a lawyer, Mr. Collins. I deal in facts contracts, the letter of the law. But in my 20 years as Harold's attorney, I saw things that defied rational explanation. He straightened his tie. Just proceed with caution. Read what Harold has written, then make your decision. With that, he left me alone in the library. The envelope felt heavy in my hands as I stared up at Harold Thorne's portrait, those piercing blue eyes seemingly following me. After a moment's hesitation, I broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in the same flowing script as my name on the envelope and a small brass key. Dear Matthew, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am dead, and Malcolm has fulfilled his duty as executive. No doubt you are confused by my decision to name you as my heir. The others certainly will be. They've spent years cultivating my favor, circling like vultures waiting for me to die. But the Thorne inheritance was never theirs to claim. You carry the bloodline, Matthew. The true bloodline through your grandmother Catherine, who was wise enough to flee from the family legacy. She understood the price of Thorne wealth in a way that others never have. The key enclosed will open a cabinet in my private study, located behind the master bedroom on the second floor. Inside, you will find a leather-bound journal, my journal, which explains everything. Read it carefully. Understand what you are being offered before you decide. Thornwood Manor is more than a house. The Thorne fortune is more than money. Both come with obligations that have weighed heavily on me and on every Thorne heir before me. You have a choice, Matthew. A genuine choice which is more than I ever had. Choose wisely. With hope and trepidation, Harold Thorne. I folded the letter and stared at the key. It was small, intricately wrought with a design on the bow that resembled a stylized tree. The implications of Harold's letter were unsettling. What obligations? What price? And what did he mean about my grandmother understanding something the others didn't? A soft knock at the library door interrupted my thoughts. Porter stood in the doorway. Mr. Collins, I've come to show you to your room, if you're ready. I pocketed the key and letter. Yes, thank you, Porter. As we walked through the corridors of Thornwood Manor, I studied the portraits lining the walls, men and women from various eras, all with the same proud bearing. Many with those distinctive piercing blue eyes. The Thorne family, I asked Porter. Yes, sir. Generations of them. Your ancestors, in a manner of speaking. You said earlier that you knew Harold well, I pressed. Porter kept his gaze forward as we climbed the grand staircase to the second floor. As well as anyone, sir. What did you think of him, I asked. He considered the question before answering. Mr. Thorne was a fair employer, demanding but reasonable. He valued loyalty and discretion above all else. And his interest in the occult? Porter faltered for a moment, then recovered quickly. Mr. Thorne had many scholarly interests. Mr. Blackwood seemed to think there was more to it than scholarly interest. We reached a door at the end of a corridor. Porter opened it, revealing a spacious bedroom with a 4-poster bed, antique furniture, and tall windows overlooking the grounds. Your room, sir? The bathroom is through that door. Dinner is at 7 Huzaras in the dining room. I'll come to escort you down, as the house can be confusing for newcomers. He turned to leave. Porter, I said. You didn't answer my question. He paused in the doorway, his back to me. It's not my place to discuss Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne's personal affairs, sir. But if you're asking whether you should take his warning seriously. He turned to face me, his expression grave. Yes, you should, very seriously indeed. After Porter left, I sat on the edge of the bed trying to make sense of everything. The inheritance, the cryptic warnings, the strange tension among the other guests. None of it added up to a coherent picture. I decided to look for Harold's study. The letter had said it was behind the master bedroom on the second floor. I was already on the second floor, so it couldn't be far. The corridors of Thornwood were like a labyrinth, turning back on themselves, branching unexpectedly. Twice I found myself in the same place, having walked in what I thought was a straight line. The house seemed to defy normal geometry, expanding beyond what should have been possible based on its external appearance. Finally, I found a set of double doors that had to lead to the master suite. They opened onto a sitting room, furnished in dark green and gold, with another door leading to what was clearly the master bedroom. Inside, the room was dominated by an ornately carved bed with a canopy. On the far wall, partially hidden behind a tapestry, I found another door. It was locked, but the brass key from Harold's letter fit perfectly. The door swung open with barely a sound, revealing a circular room with bookshelves lining the walls and a large desk at its center. The only window was a circular skylight in the ceiling, casting a pool of light onto the desk. The room had a strange, almost palpable quality to it. The air felt different, heavier somehow, and there was a faint scent that I couldn't quite identify. Not unpleasant, but unusual. Old books perhaps mixed with something else, incense maybe. The desk was meticulously organized with stacks of papers, several leather-bound books, and what looked like maps or diagrams. At the center there was a small wooden cabinet about the size of a jewelry box. The brass key unlocked it as well. Inside, just as Harold's letter had promised, was a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, the leather darkened with age and use. When I opened it, I was surprised to find the first entry dated nearly 40 years ago, September 3rd, 1985. Today I became the Thorn heir. In truth, not just in name. Uncle William is dead, his life cut short like all who came before him. He was 57 older than most, but still too young. As I watched them lower his coffin into the ground, I felt it for the first time, the weight of the obligation pressing down on me like a physical force. The others felt nothing. Of course, Edwin was too busy calculating his share of the inheritance. Margaret was already planning how to redecorate Thornwood. None of them understand what it means to be the true heir. None of them can hear the whispers from the woods. I closed the journal, a chill running down my spine despite the warmth of the room. Whispers from the woods. It sounded like the ramblings of a disturbed mind. But Blackwood had said Harold was of sound mind until the end. And there had been something in Porter's manner, a weariness, when I'd mentioned the occult. I slipped the journal into my pocket, deciding I would read it properly later in the privacy of my room. For now I needed to process everything I'd learned. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. On one of the bookshelves was a framed photograph, the only personal item in an otherwise academic space. I moved closer to examine it. The photo showed a group of people at what looked like a family gathering. I recognized a younger Harold Thorne, immediately his height, and those distinctive blue eyes unmistakable. Beside him was a woman who had to be my grandmother, Catherine. She had the same eyes that Edwin had said I'd inherited. And next to her, a young woman who could only be my mother, Elizabeth, perhaps 16 or 17 at the time. They were standing in front of Thornwood Manor, but something about the house looked different. It took me a moment to realize what it was. The left wing, where my bedroom was now located, was a blackened ruin, clearly damaged by fire. I turned the frame over. On the back was written, "After the fire, summer 1973. The last gathering." The fire must have been significant if it was referred to as the fire. And the last gathering, the last time the extended family had come together. My mother had never mentioned a fire or Thornwood Manor or any connection to the wealthy Thorne family. Why? I returned to my room, Harold's journal burning a hole in my pocket. There was was still time before dinner enough to start reading and begin unraveling the mystery I'd stumbled into. But as I reached for the journal, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Eliza Ward standing in the hallway, her green eyes studying me intently. "Mr. Collins," she said softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, and please call me Matthew." "Matthew," she corrected herself, glancing past me into the room. "May I come in? There are things we should discuss before dinner. Things the others won't tell you." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. She moved with a dancer's grace, her dark hair falling like a curtain as she turned to face me. "You have no idea what you've inherited." "Do you?" she asked, her voice soft but direct. "A house and a fortune, apparently. And a curse," she added. "Don't forget the curse." "A curse," I repeated flatly. "You're joking." Her expression remained serious. "Do I look like I'm joking?" The Thorne family has been under a curse for generations. Every primary heir dies young, usually in their 50s or early 60s. Harold making it to 73 was something of a miracle. And every heir dies in a way that seems natural, but is just a little too convenient. Heart attacks, strokes, sudden illness accidents that aren't quite accidental. "That's crazy, is it?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Look at the family history. It's all there in the portraits downstairs." Check the dates. None of them made it to old age. None except the ones who weren't primary heirs. I thought of the journal in my pocket. Harold's mention of his uncle dying too young at 57. "Why are you telling me this?" Eliza moved toward the window, looking out over the grounds. "Because I liked Harold. He was kind to me when others weren't. He funded my education, encouraged my interest in anthropology and folklore, and because he chose you for a reason." She turned back to face me. "You're different from the others. You don't want the Thorne money. Not yet, anyway. I don't even know if I'm going to accept the inheritance." She smiled, a small, sad expression. "That's why he chose you. The choice has to be genuine. That's part of it." "Part of what?" "The obligation he wrote to you about. The price of the Thorne fortune." She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "Harold told me some of it over the years. Pieces of the story. The Thorne wealth didn't come from shrewd investments or family connections. It came from a bargain made centuries ago by the first Thorne to settle in America. A bargain with something old and powerful that lives in the woods surrounding Thornwood." I thought of Harold's journal entry. "None of them can hear the whispers from the woods." "What kind of bargain?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The kind that requires regular payment," Eliza said grimly. "Every Thorne heir becomes the caretaker of the bargain. They ensure the terms are met, the payments made. In return, the family prospers, but the price is high. No heir lives to see old age. And if an heir fails in their duty," I asked, my voice hollow. She gestured toward the window. "Did you notice how the forest seems to press in on the grounds? How the trees seem to watch the house? There was a Thorne heir in the 1920s who tried to renege on the bargain. The forest began to encroach, swallowing parts of the estate. Family members started disappearing. Strange accidents. It only stopped when the heir's son took over and restored the proper order." "You're talking about human sacrifice," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Eliza shook her head. "No, nothing so crude. The bargain isn't about blood. Not directly. It's about energy, life force, years of life. The heir gives up decades they might have lived, siphoned away slowly over time. That's why they die young, their vitality drained." "This is insane," I said, my voice thick with disbelief. "You're telling me Harold Thorne, a modern man with a Harvard education, believed in some supernatural bargain with a forest spirit?" "Harold didn't just believe in it," Eliza said softly. "He lived it for decades. Ask yourself why a rational man would structure his will the way he did. Why would he leave everything to a distant relative he barely knew, bypassing people who had been part of his life for years?" Eliza moved toward the door, her voice soft but serious. "Read his journal, all of it, then decide." She paused at the doorway, her gaze lingering on me. One more thing, be careful around the others, especially Margaret. She's furious about being passed over. She and Richard have been positioning themselves for years, cultivating Harold, looking after him. The fact that he left everything to you, she won't accept it easily. And Edwin, I asked. Edwin is complicated. He's the last of the previous generation. He knows more about the Thorne history than anyone, but he's bitter. He was passed over as heir decades ago, when Harold's uncle chose Harold instead of him. He spent his life on the periphery, watching, waiting for his chance. She gave me a long look. All of them will try to influence you in the coming days. Trust none of them completely. Even you, I asked. A small, fleeting smile flickered across her face. Especially me. I have my own reasons for being here. With that, she slipped out the door, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. I had just enough time before dinner to read a few more entries in Harold's journal. The next entry was dated December 15th, 1985. The dreams have started. Uncle William warned me about them. Visions of the woods at night, of the ancient oak at the center of the grove, of the door that isn't a door. Last night I saw it clearly for the first time, the spiral pattern carved into the trunk, the symbols that seem to shift when you look at them directly. And I heard the voice, the one that is spoken to every Thorne heir, since Nathaniel made the original bargain in 1784. It knows me. It called me by name. Another entry dated November 3rd, 1986. I made the first payment today on Sam Hine as tradition dictates. The ritual was exactly as described in the family grimoire. I felt it, the drawing away of something vital within me, like a siphon attached to my very essence. The physicians will find nothing wrong. Of course they never do. But I've aged more in one night than in the previous year. A small price to pay for the continued prosperity of the Thorne line, but I understand now why the heirs always look so much older than their years. A final entry dated July 18th, 2024 made my blood run cold. I've made a decision that will upend the careful balance I've maintained for decades. I'm naming Matthew Collins as my heir. The others will be furious, but none of them are suitable. The bloodline must be pure, uncompromised by previous exposure to the entity. Matthew is the last branch of the family that remains untouched. His grandmother Catherine was wise enough to cut all ties with Thornwood and the Thorne fortune. She married a man with no connection to our world and disappeared into a normal life. Her daughter Elizabeth never knew the truth. And now her son Matthew represents our last hope of breaking the cycle. For I have discovered something in the oldest family records, a possibility no previous heir has explored, a loophole in the original bargain. If I am right, Matthew may be able to do what none of us could, end the bargain without destroying the family. But the choice must be his, freely made with full knowledge. I can only guide him to the truth and hope he has the strength to face it. I closed the journal, my hands trembling slightly. Either Harold Thorne had been delusional, caught in a family myth that had been passed down for generations, or there was something genuinely supernatural at work at Thornwood Manor. Neither possibility was comforting. A soft knock at the door announced Porter's arrival to escort me to dinner. I tucked the journal away in a drawer, trying to compose myself. Whatever the truth about the Thorne curse, I needed to keep my wits about me. The people gathering for dinner had just seen their expected inheritance handed to a stranger. As Eliza had warned, I couldn't trust any of them completely. The dining room was as impressive as the rest of Thornwood. A long table that could seat 20 set with fine china and crystal with silver candelabras, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Large windows looked out onto the gardens, though with night falling they reflected the room back like dark mirrors. Everyone was already seated when Porter showed me in. Blackwood at one end of the table, Edwin at the other, Margaret and Richard on one side, Eliza on the other. Porter indicated that my place was beside Eliza, facing Margaret and Richard. Mr. Collins, Blackwood said as I took my seat. I trust you've had time to settle in? Yes, thank you, I replied, acutely aware of Margaret's cold stare. And have you had a chance to explore Thornwood? Edwin asked from the head of the table. It's quite a remarkable house. Been in the family for 7 generations. I've only seen a small part of it, I admitted. You should take a proper tour tomorrow, Edwin said. I'd be happy to show you around, point out some of the historical features. His roomy eyes had a sharp glint to them. The history of this house is the history of our family. Might help you understand why Harold made the choices he did. That's very kind of you, I said. Edwin knows all the family skeletons, Margaret said, her voice carrying a hint of mockery. Don't you, Edwin? All the dark secrets? Every family has its secrets, Margaret. Edwin replied calmly. Some are just better at keeping them than others. The first course arrived, a delicate soup served by a staff I hadn't seen before. The kitchen must have been fully staffed, as Harold's will had suggested. So, Mr. Collins, Richard said as we began to eat. Harold's letter mentioned you're a teacher. Yes, high school English. How noble, Margaret said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. Dedicating yourself to molding young minds, though I imagine the salary leaves something to be desired. It's adequate, I said. I've never been particularly motivated by money. How fortunate then that it's found you anyway, she replied with a tight smile. What Margaret means, Richard said, is that it must be quite a shock going from a teacher's salary to being one of the wealthiest men in New England overnight. I haven't decided to accept yet, I said. There was a moment of stunned silence around the table. You can't be serious, Margaret finally said. Quite serious. It's a major life change. I need time to consider it. Consider what Richard asked. It's $70 million and a historic estate. What's to consider? Perhaps Mr. Collins understands that wealth brings complications, Blackwood interjected. Responsibilities, obligations. Edwin echoed, nodding slowly. Yes, the Thorne heir has always had obligations. What kind of obligations? I asked, looking directly at Edwin. He studied me for a long moment. Harold didn't tell you. He left some cryptic instructions. Ah, Edwin nodded. The journal, I presume. I hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much, among other things. Edwin, really? Margaret cut in. Are we going to indulge this nonsense? Harold's eccentricities were one thing, but to perpetuate these ridiculous family myths. They're not myths, Margaret, Edwin said sharply. You've lived at Thornwood long enough to know that. You've seen things. We all have. I've seen an old house with drafty corridors and creaky floorboards, she replied. I've seen an intelligent man who let himself be consumed by superstition and folklore. What I haven't seen is any evidence of curses or bargains, or whatever other nonsense you and Harold convinced yourselves was real. Margaret has always been the practical one, Richard said with a small smile. Feet firmly on the ground. One of us had to be, she said. Someone had to manage the day-to-day while Harold locked himself in that study poring over ancient texts and conducting his rituals. She turned to me. Is that what he's left you, Mr. Collins? A collection of musty old books and a family superstition, among other things, I repeated. You know, Eliza said, speaking for the first time since dinner began. Anthropologically speaking, family curses are fascinating cultural phenomena. They persist because they serve a purpose, usually to explain patterns of misfortune or to enforce certain behaviors within the family structure. And the risk is high, Matthew. Very high. I sat back, absorbing his words. The weight of the choice before me was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just a matter of money and property. It was about the entire legacy of the Thorne family, a legacy tied to something far older and darker than I had ever imagined. So what now? I asked, my voice unsteady. If I accept the inheritance, I take on the responsibility of this curse. If I decline, the estate falls apart and the family continues to suffer. But I don't even know what Harold found, what he discovered in those old records. Edwin took a long, deliberate sip of his brandy before answering. That's the dilemma, isn't it? You take the inheritance and you'll have to carry the weight of it, perhaps uncovering things that no one should ever know, dealing with forces that have haunted this family for centuries. Or you walk away, leave everything behind and hope the curse doesn't catch up with you. But I can't walk away, I said quietly. Not now. Not after all I've learned. Harold thought he found a way out, there's still hope. Maybe there's still a chance to break the cycle. But what if it's true? What if everything he wrote is real? What if I'm the one who can finally free the family? Edwin stared into the fire, his expression distant. You'll have to decide soon, Matthew. The clock is ticking. You have 30 days, and then the choice will be made for you, whether you like it or not. I stood up, walking over to the window. The vast dark woods stretching out before me, the flicker of the firelight reflecting off the glass. It all felt unreal, like some twisted dream I couldn't wake from. But the reality was stark. Thornwood Manor. The legacy, the curse, the inheritance, it was all part of a puzzle I was now unwillingly part of. And I had to figure out if I could solve it, or if it would consume me like it had consumed every heir before me. What if Harold found the loophole, but he couldn't act on it? I said, turning back to Edwin. What if that's why he chose me, because I'm the only one who can actually do it? I don't know, Edwin replied softly. But it's possible. All I can say is that whatever you choose, you need to be prepared for the consequences. If you think you can handle the weight of the Thorn legacy, then accept it. But if you're not sure, you might want to walk away before it's too late. A heavy silence settled between us, the only sound the crackling of the fire. I was torn. The temptation to understand, to know the truth, to break the curse was strong. But the risk was enormous. And yet walking away meant abandoning the family, leaving them to suffer, to face the same fate that had claimed each heir before me. I could feel the pull of the woods, the weight of the family's history pressing on me. The Thorn legacy was mine now, whether I liked it or not. And with it came the burden of the choice. Would I be the one to break the cycle? Or would I become just another chapter in the dark history of Thornwood Manor? Edwin finished his brandy and set the glass down on the side table, his eyes locking onto mine. You'll find your answer soon enough, Matthew. Just remember, once you accept the inheritance, there's no going back. You're in this for good. With that, he wheeled himself back to the fire, leaving me to face the growing storm of decisions swirling in my mind. I took a deep breath and walked toward the door, knowing that whatever happened next would shape the rest of my life. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.